Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the buffs to Earthquake that happened about 10 days ago. I've been very out of sorts over the holidays, but now hopefully with those kind of coming to an end, I can hopefully get back to it. So if you were not aware, Earthquake was buffed by 50% about 10 days ago, and if you didn't notice it or you had no clue that that had happened, I wouldn't be surprised because it doesn't really change that much for us. I know that 50% is a huge number to be given to a spender ability like Earthquake, but at the end of the day, it's just not a big focus of any build, and there's not a great way to build around it. There are some builds that kind of came out, especially right when the change happened, and we'll talk about them because there are still reasons to play them, but they're not required or necessary by any means. A lot of the top elemental shamans that were experimenting with it are already going back to playing the build that I have up right now because it's just easier to play, and that's really what it comes down to. But we'll talk about them anyway. The big change here, if you want to play something else, and the main reason I want to hammer this home, the main reason to play this is because you want to and not because you're hoping for better results necessarily, but you are going to drop your 1 point in Echo Chamber, your Liquid Magma Totem, and your Power of the Maelstrom into Echoes of the Great Sundering. So that's what this first version of this build looks like. And the big thing here, the big problem with this build is by not having Liquid Magma Totem, it means that you have to try extra hard to get those Flame Shocks rolling, and it becomes a much more micro play style that you have to adopt because of the fact that you don't have Liquid Magma Totem to fall back on and just throw down and get 3 Flame Shocks. Now you have to work a little bit harder to do it. So what it looks like if you're going to play this version of the build, because again, I guess I should mention this, obviously, with Echoes of the Great Sundering, what we're doing is going back and forth. We're just alternating back and forth with Earth Shock and with Earthquake, back and forth, back and forth. This talent here, Flash Lightning, is really not doing anything for us. We're not pressing Chain Lightning any more than we normally would. And there's a couple places where you might press it just a little bit more that I'll explain in a second. But you might be wondering why we wouldn't just path through Elemental Blast instead. And the reason is that under no circumstance is Elemental Blast a DPS increase pretty much at all in this build or any build in Mythic Plus right now. And the reason for that is because it has less usage or doesn't get nearly as much usage out of Wind Speakers and single target over Earthshock, which is where you're really getting that value. And then the other half of Elemental Blast, which is getting that buff from Elemental Blast, is largely useless because of how often that you have Primordial Wave up and you're getting that buff from the 2-piece set bonus. You're basically getting that Elemental Blast all the time. So that whole buff section of Elemental Blast becomes way less useful than it would be, like, say, in Season 2. So Elemental Blast is a DPS loss in pretty much any situation in Mythic Plus, so there's really not even a reason to pick it up because you're just like, you're losing Earthshock. So it's better to just come through Flash of Lightning to avoid taking Elemental Blast. So the way that this build would work would basically be that you would always want to be going into a pack with at least 50% Maelstrom. We're not going to cover anything with like Stormkeeper, so I'm not going to press that right now. You could start off a pack that way to get Maelstrom quicker, but the way that you play around Stormkeeper remains the same. You can use that either to generate Maelstrom if you want or to just do more damage, or you can hold it for Ascendance procs. That's typically what I like to do, is hope to kind of line that up with an Ascendance proc. But nothing really changes there compared to the other build. So you would always want to go in with at least 50 Maelstrom, and then that way you can drop your Earthquake, use a Primordial Wave. That also gives you Surge of Power. Use your Flame Shock, and then hopefully it spreads to another target. Like right there, it didn't even spread. So that's a little unfortunate. And then the next thing you would want to do is spread the last 2. You wouldn't want to do that in Ascendance necessarily, but it happened right there. So the other thing is you play Ascendance exactly the same, and then now you're just going back and forth between Earthshock and Earthquake, and then making sure again that you're trying to keep as many of these Flame Shocks rolling as you possibly can, and you have to micro them a lot more than you would normally. But during like Ascendance and stuff like that, you just press your Lava Burst. Right there, I use my Stormkeeper just to get that rolling as well. But you also just want to make sure that you're not just abandoning pressing Lava Burst either, because there's no real synergy here between your there's no real synergy here between pressing your spenders as much and the way that this build actually plays, where you just want to be pressing Lava Burst all the time. It's almost like it kind of just gets in the way of pressing Lava Bursts. So you want to make sure that you're still not like abandoning pressing lava burst, and you want to make sure you're still refreshing those flame shocks when they're about to fall off. That's still the crux of the build. That's not changing anything. It just gives you a little bit more oomph out of every time that you're pressing your spinders, especially with Earthquake. So that's the main thing here. So if I just stop attacking for a second, you can see that Earthquake is going to be doing a lot more damage than it was previously. And I know I didn't do a great job of showing it there because I was trying to talk and play at the same time. And those two things, trying to do those two things at the same time can be very, very difficult. But you get the kind of the gist there. You have to pay a lot more attention to things like Flame Shock duration. And you have no way of helping yourself if like everything falls off, but you don't have that liquid magma totem to help get yourself started. And you're just going to have to be constantly watching those durations so that you can micromanage with that surge of power to make sure that you're keeping those flame shocks going. So you can do this, and like the difference between this build and the previous build, the main build that everyone has been typically playing, is about, this one's like 3%. That's the number that I believe. It's very, very minor difference in AoE. It's like 3% better, but like 2% worse in single target. You are losing the 1 point of power of the Maelstrom, which can be useful in single target, especially combined with lining that up with like Stormkeeper, though you never like play around it, but when it does happen, it is a good amount, a good little chunk of extra damage. And then you're also losing Echo Chamber, which also is going to be important in single target. You're not making that up anywhere with these two talents. So it kind of is what it is in that department. If you want, again, like you're not throwing by playing this build at all. It just, I feel like for me personally, it's a lot more brain drain to have to micro that much harder with those flame shocks than with the normal build. You can get a little bit more damage, especially at the high end for AoE, especially when you start getting into like, like 15 to 20 targets. This one might shine a little bit more, but I don't think overall it is worth it for me personally, at least for how much you have to think about it. The other version of this build is taking out 1 point of echoes so that you can pick up Liquid Magma Totem. You can also go that route as well. Again, it plays basically the same as the normal build now because you have Liquid Magma Totem, but now you're just swapping back and forth between Earth Shock and Earthquake. Again, I don't feel like it's worth it. If you're not going to take 2 points in Echoes of the Great Sundering, then you might as well just take these 2 points instead. That's just my opinion anyway, that this just comes out better overall. So you can play those two builds if you want to. They're there. They're not necessarily worse, but they're not better either. They're just different. So if you're one of the people out there, if you're like one of the 10 crazy people who like playing with Echoes of the Great Sundering, you are more than welcome to try out either one of those builds if you find that interesting to you. So going back to this build and its implication for for how Earthquake was buffed, do you need to change anything if you're just playing this build? The answer is no. You can kind of just play it the same way you were doing before. You don't really need to mix anything up here. If you're getting like above, I believe the target count number was like 9 or 10 targets, you can start maybe making it a little bit more of a priority to put Earthquake down. Just make sure that you're always using Master of the Elements with that. Just get that extra 20% damage, which shouldn't be hard in this build at all, that you should be able to do that without thinking. You can do that and kind of weave between those Lava Surge procs. Obviously, you're not really worrying about it so much in Ascendance. You don't want to be giving up casts during Ascendance to pressing literally anything else other than Lava Burst. But it does give you that ability to get more Earthquakes out quickly. You can kind of focus a little bit more on that, but it's not something that you need to be heavily playing around differently because of this buff. I mean, I think overall the biggest problem with buffing Earthquake in general is, one, like things can jump out of it. I don't think that's nearly as big of an issue as I think some people either make it out to believe, especially in this season. In this season, it seems like a lot of like basically every dungeon, you're not really moving around so much with large trash packs trying to move from place to place. The only places I can think that you do that are where it doesn't really matter. For instance, like in Blackrick Hold, you might do that on the Gauntlet because of the just trying to get to each of the Fell Dominators with all the bats going out. That's actually one place where like the Earthquake build would be better, but it's kind of like just trash damage. It's just kind of throwaway damage. You might call it padding. I don't think it's necessarily padding, but it's not really helpful damage to be really worrying about like things like the bats or the spiders. The spiders obviously need to die in Blackrick Hold. But in that situation, that is a place where you're actually moving constantly, and it's kind of hard to get damage through Earthquake anyway. So even then, it's kind of a moot point. The only place I can really think of that might be better to come down here and grab Echoes of the Great Sundering might be like the Everbloom. That's the only place I can really think about it. But even then, I don't think it's nowhere close to being what I consider necessary or needed. And I can't imagine myself going in this direction unless someone finds like a breakthrough of like why it's actually better. But I think it is important to mention those builds just because it is another way to play if you find that interesting, or if you find that that you just don't like the way it plays now. If you want a little bit more change of pace in your gameplay, and if you actually like Echoes of the Great Sundering, you're not throwing in any way, shape, or form by taking Echoes of the Great Sundering. You can do that. It is a viable way of doing it. I just do think that it's a little bit too much to think about, as well as it just takes that much more micromanaging on the Flame Shock situation. And that's been my biggest issue. Like waxing on my own experiences this season, my biggest issue has been Flame Shock management. For whatever reason, there's so many instances where you have big mobs surrounded by tiny mobs, and you don't really control where that second Flame Shock is going with your Surge of Power. So if you Flame Shock one thing and you're hoping to get two, and it goes on something really small or something that's about to die, then you're basically just like lose that Flame Shock pretty quickly. So that's been my biggest issue. So adding more issues by not having Liquid Magma Totem just feels like it makes the problems that I'm already having in Mythic Plus that much more prominent. So for me personally, I can't see myself ever going in that direction away from Liquid Magma Totem. And just by not taking 2 points in Echoes of the Great Sundering, I can't imagine just doing the 1 point. I don't think it's enough to really make up the damage there. So especially when you're taking the other point of Flash Lightning, where it's basically doing nothing. It just feels like you're just throwing away a point to get a point that might be slightly comparable to what you already have. So that's kind of where I'm at with all this. And just on the topic of buffs while we're talking about it, I feel like that's really all that Blizzard could have done with the buff situation. I think that they could have gone maybe a little bit more ham on the Earthquake buff, but it would have made them look that much more desperate. But I think Ellie's in a good place right now. For the most part, oh man, I don't even want to say that. I was trying to be like really positive. Obviously, it's not as strong as like the top classes, but it's not at the bottom either. It just kind of is. I would like it to be in a good spot, but I feel like we're so mid that they can't really buff it without it becoming like good. Like any kind of like meaningful change to the core way that it plays right now, when it's centered so heavily around Lava Burst, any actual meaningful change to Elemental would just make it good, and we're not mages, and so they're not going to like purposely give us a buff like they did with the mage specs. So I don't know what they really can do other than a full rework of the spec at this point. There's just too many issues in the fire side. I've said this so many times. There's just too many issues on the fire side of the tree to really make it easy for them to balance. Having your AoE kind of be dictated by your single target abilities will always lead to trouble. If they're not something like Blade Flurry. Blade Flurry is like a good example of like how you fix something that's supposed to, you're only supposed to be hitting one target, and then you're just cleaving to everything else. Something like Blade Flurry allows you to have like a tuning knob that you can just tune up and down with how much damage Blade Flurry does. It makes it very simple. But because we're actually just doing a single target ability on multiple targets, that makes it a little bit more wonky. And if they were to buff Lava Burst pretty much at all, like we're just getting better in all situations, and I don't know where they really want Ellie to be. So I don't know. I'm kind of just rambling now, but I think this is basically all we can really expect. I don't expect any more buffs moving forward. Ellie is fine. I know that some tier lists have got them like in like F tier or like C tier. I don't think we're nearly that bad, but we don't really have the same level of like snap AoE or snap damage that a lot of other classes have, and that can make things more challenging, especially at a higher level of play. But obviously some people have been able to keep up with it. I think there's at least like seven or eight elemental shamans that are right now in rank 1 tier for Mythic Plus to get the title. So there are people who are able to do it. You do just kind of have to build your group around it a little bit more, or play out of your mind. So, I think Ellie is mid AF. That's what I can kind of put it, which I guess equates to being fine. But I was really hoping to see more than just the Earthquake buff, but I really don't know how they would have done it. But that is what it is. Those are the 2 additional builds that you can choose to play. I wouldn't do it, but you can if you're looking for something to change it up. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. It helps the channel a lot. I stream at twitch.tv/Ridmark if you're interested in watching me do keys, or just hang out and chill, or when I do raiding. I do all that live on Twitch. So if you're interested in that, feel free to give me a follow there as well. I also have a Discord. If you have any questions for me specifically, then you're free to join that as well. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a good one, and I will see you in the next video.